Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our third and final webinar explaining the benefits of technology companies as a target market for you guys as a way to grow your business. Today, we have an unbelievable opportunity to actually talk to a longtime technology underwriter who's going to help give you tips and tricks and talk to you about how you can really understand a technology risk and what questions to be asking and what to know and understand. So today we have with us Brad Shrum. He is a 30-year insurance veteran, has been the director of sales and underwriting for Wingman Insurance for a number of years. But prior to that, he's worked at some names you might know like CNA and Chubb as director of some of their larger technology books of business. He is absolutely exceptional. He has a wide knowledge, and so I hope you take advantage of the opportunity to ask him all your questions. With that in mind, there is an area on your screen that's going to allow you to ask questions throughout the course of this webinar. Most of them I'll hold till the end unless it's pertinent to the moment, but we will get all of your questions answered, so please ask them whenever they pop into your head. The recording for this webinar will be available after it's over. I'll also be emailing out the other two webinars in case you missed them to make sure that you're fully prepared to start writing technology business right away. So we're really excited to have you. And after this webinar, we'll talk about how you can start quoting technology E&O accounts with Wingman right away. So with that, I hand it over to Brad to teach us all a little bit about technology risks.
Thanks, Ellie. When I see 30 plus years, I'm getting old, but I'm not that old yet.
That time.
This technology business keeps you young every day. So thank you for joining us on the seminar today. Our goals today will be, what is a tech company? We'll learn about some of the nuances of tech accounts, what do underwriters look at, from a carrier perspective, as well as yourself, and what do we think is a good risk? I'm going to try to put all this 30 years plus of knowledge in the tech space right into here. And certainly if you have any questions, like Ellie said, please post those. The trends in technology change rapidly as do risks. I've never seen risks change so quickly, and in the past, tech companies were geared toward services for others. But now what we're seeing out there, which, 30 years ago when I was holding an AOL disk, or 25 years ago, boy, have we come a long way. And there's application, or what we call app and website developers, cloud computing. I'm sure everybody's heard the buzzword of cloud, meaning that, what we used to have 15, 20, hundreds of computers in our building and managing those are now managed by others. Cryptocurrency, as you could call that, is Bitcoin mining, and blockchain, which is the newest thing. And I'm sure there'll be a few more added to this in the near future. What we also find is these technology companies follow the money, or the money follows them, and they grow very fast. We, whether we're going to talk about venture capital or private equity, they're investing very rapidly into the technology space. The things that you should ask your customers when you go out there, or your prospects, is what kind of software or hardware do they create? This is going to tell a lot about what they do, as well as from an underwriting perspective, it's going to help the underwriter determine, is this a low, medium, or high hazard type of risk? Who is the end client, the user of the software or hardware? And you can break that down into consumer, businesses, local, state, federal, and international. And what industries does the software and hardware serve? So whether it's the energy space, or whether it's government, or whether it's retail, those are some of the questions that you're going to ask. So you can see it's so fluid. And what a customer did in 2018 may not be what they're doing in 2019. Thank you.
That's a good point, Brad. The quickness with which a tech company pivots from one goal to another makes it imperative for a salesperson to ask them each year what has changed in their nature of operations. Certainly something that you wouldn't necessarily have to do with a traditional company.
And that's a good point, Ellie. So, like a shoe store, they sell shoes, just different types of shoes. They're really not a lot changes. Or a clothing store, they sell clothing. But I always say, well, today we manufacture bricks, and then tomorrow we're manufacturing dynamite. Totally two different things, but that's really how the correlation goes with technology. Now, the next thing is so interesting is how do you define a technology risk? And I always say they're creators or users of technology, but maybe they're both. That is an interesting question because today you're merging everything together. So it could be media, it could be advertising, it could be technology, it could be a retailer all in one. So sometimes you scratch your head and say, what are you? Um, and like I said, melding of technology, media, and retail all together. Like Microsoft, I think we would all agree is probably a technology risk. But Microsoft, who used to be so big in the software, is now a cloud computing company. They had a change or they were going to go out of business. Amazon, what is Amazon? Who? From retail to Alexis to developing technology to advertising. What do you call Amazon? LegalZoom, LegalZoom, who comes up with legal forms, but do they have the technology and they put it all online? And Match.com, Match.com, it's a dating service. So you have social media, you could have technology, all that, and then you have the liabilities associated with each of these risks. So sometimes it's not going to be clear cut. I would say smaller risk or emerging risk tend to be clearer, whether they're a creator or a user. But someone who's selling lipstick or makeup online and that's all they do, that's an e-commerce company. That's not really a technology company. They're using technology to sell their products and services, but they're not creating it. So those are some of the questions you got to ask yourself because you're going to have to figure out what kind of professional liability coverage they need, GL. So there's a lot of questions that go into that.
Would
So
you say, Brad, that the
yes,
question you can pose is, do you derive your revenue from the software or hardware versus something you sell on software or hardware?
yes,
So a
yes.
technology risk would be one that actually gets their revenue from the software or hardware that they've created rather than from selling a product or service on a piece of software.
Yes, but it could be a technology because they are selling as well. So you could have a liability exposure if you sell a piece of software that may not be yours, but what if you sell that to the client and it's the wrong piece and they use it and their systems, don't work.
Makes a
So
lot of
there's a lot to it. So not as easy to determine that sometimes. Again, you're getting away from a lot of the traditional manufacturing and retail, or like healthcare too. Um, the other thing, from an underwriting perspective, there are many interesting questions that are not applicable to other companies of similar size. Revenue is not often the determining factor for risk. Why? Because small companies can have a huge risk. So you could have a risk that is doing 500,000 or a million in sales and it's controlling a medical device versus you could have a CDW or something similar that sells software where the risk is low and their sales are 4 or 5 billion. So that's why underwriters always ask, what is this product or service used for? Is there a privacy exposure? So if we sell software that is used to collect customer or patient information and it's stored on our server, you have a major privacy exposure. So people say just because it's got revenue, a lot of revenue, doesn't mean it's difficult. You have to look at the what the product or service is used for in the industry group that it's used for. And when you go into Wingman technology, you'll see that when you input an account. So just be aware of that. Okay.
All right, so now we're going to start into a series of questions that are going to help you understand what to ask and why it's important to ask these questions to get a clear picture of a risk. So take it away, Brad.
Okay. Thank you, Ellie. Funding. I'm sure a lot of you either invest in the market or hear some buzzwords for technology, accounts. Do they have investors? I always like to hear that they do have investors because that tells us that someone truly believes in them and that the potential for success is good. Not to say it's great, nor could they go bust, but the potential seems to be better versus I'm working out of my garage. But if you take Amazon, who started that way, in Apple, you can be wrong at that. If they're raising outside funds, is it seed money? Is it Series A, Series B? This can tell you how mature a company it is and how easily it is to raise money, while making money shows company viability. Who the investors, angel investors, private equity, self-funded. And like I said, investors can be key when underwriting an account. Um, you as a producer may want to work with private equity funds because they're always looking to protect their investment through insurance. So if there's no coverage and a technology account has a claim, the fund or the investor is not going to be too happy if that money has to get shelled out for something except for investing in the business. So I'm a big believer in understanding the funding of a company and what they're doing with that money. So keep that in mind. But you may want to target some of these firms if you know angel investors or private equity firms. You could write their portfolio of companies. I've had success over many years of picking up these portfolio of companies. I should also mention that sales on some of these companies, you could start out at 500,000 and a year later you're at 20. That's the other beauty. Now, the downside to that is when they get big, somebody may want to buy them. So there are perils that you have to be aware of where you can grow that little mouse into that big elephant and then the elephant goes away. So that's why you got to keep looking for them. Okay. Who are their clients? Who does the company do business with? I would tell you that the federal government, or at least was, a good risk. They used to pay their bills. But the federal government, there are some laws that protect um, software and service companies from being sued. So I would always tell you, and the government tends to be good payers. We like federal government contractors. It's good business. Local government can be tougher because local governments can't print money. So they tend to sue quicker than anyone else. Commercial businesses are fine, and B2B means business to business, or you could have business to consumer or B2C. Okay, so we like commercial business. Yeah, there are claims, but I would tell you in the band that we really like between 1 and 50 million, the claims tend to be less because there tends to be more control. And then SaaS is software as a service. You're going to see a lot of terms, and you may want to learn some of those. You can just go online to Google and get the definitions, but there's a lot of software as a service, software as a platform. It's a lot of different things. It basically means you're renting software from others. Individual users, like you see here, B2C, additional risk questions. Are there social media exposures? Are there large quantities of data stored? Is there sensitive data stored? Those are some other questions that will be asked as well. So we could have a social media risk. We could have a magazine that's published online. There are just so many different options and ways to look at this. And then that's why Ellie and myself and Heather are here to help you answer those questions. And all we need is a website, and certainly we can help you. We try not to be website underwriters because websites tend not to tell the truth all the time.
Oh man, technology companies love to inflate what they do on their websites.
And that's all because they get the search engines and the words, right? The keywords, Ellie.
Yeah.
And do they work on any hot button industries? And the boy, of those change. Personal and commercial banking and lending, aerospace. Let's face it, driverless cars in the next 15 years, that's all that's going to be going on. Cryptocurrency, healthcare, and all these have different exposures. Some have bodily injury and property damage exposures, where others may just have the privacy exposure, where a hacker gets in and steals information about customers. So a lot of different things. I don't want to scare you with any of these. We're just saying these are the things that we and you should be looking at.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
If you were going after a certain account, you would try to go after software as a service companies who lease out their software, like, for example, how Nationwide has their agents pay to use their platform. That would be software as a service.
Right.
But you would try to avoid some of the hot button industries because they're harder to insure and thus very pricey, and often you would have to go to the Lloyd's market. So that would be the driverless cars, the banking and lending, that kind of stuff. So if you're choosing who to target, you would go after more B2B software as a service or soft B2C targets and federal contractors.
That's right, like educational software, accounting software. I mean,
Retail software.
retail. I mean, there's many different things. You're right. These can be tougher, Ellie. Exactly. These
Now,
are
in town, there's like a number of companies that are sort of help desks or IT service companies. Would you call them easy risks?
easy. Staffing, people who are providing IT staffing to companies, IT consultants, people who are selling hardware. Hardware across the board tends to be easier stuff.
Unless
Um,
it's like in one of these hot buttons,
right,
healthcare.
right. Or energy. Exactly. Who does the selling? Companies that make or sell their own software are different from independent contractors who create software for others to sell. And you'll ask, is the revenue derived from the software itself or using the software to sell something else? Wingman is a tech company, for example, but not for insurance purposes. We use software to sell insurance, not software. We are an insurance entity for risk purposes. Uber, it's a taxi cab company. Think about Uber and how is Uber a technology company? It's a huge question. They are, but they aren't, because they get caught up in these independent contractors that now they're saying the drivers work for them. Who, as a carrier, would ever have thought that, right? So the laws are changing, the courts are changing, and the last thing a carrier wants to do is get caught up in some of those things. So it's a great question. If they're not selling or marketing a specific product, do you build software for others on an independent contractor basis? Those tend to be a little easier because it's not directly your product. Are you working at the direction of the client? I would tell you that's the best part. If a client tells you, here's what I want you to do, there's checks and balances, that's easy business. So it's just a matter of finding that balance. Contracts, this is probably the biggest area because we do ask this on our application. If you're working by a handshake, you're going to lose every time. Contracts don't prevent suits, they just help in the defense of a suit. Okay? Um, that is really the bottom line. You can't go by a handshake. I have had claims over the years that handshakes and they don't look good for your insured if they're the defendant in the case. You want language holding your company harmless. You want language. You don't want language guaranteeing the technology will always work because it won't. You want to limit the liability. So if you're doing a contract for $250,000, you don't want to have your liabilities be for $5 million. Just doesn't make sense. You want to cover it up to the value of the contract. And there's force majeure, and force majeure is really an act of God. So if we are a cloud computing company and unfortunately a major earthquake hits and nothing works, we don't want to be held responsible for that because if we have a 6.0 earthquake, everything's going to be gone. So those are some of the things that you're going to want to look for, and you'll see that in our application online.
And as a value added service to your customers, helping them get basic contracts in place for all of their customers, whether it be a privacy policy or a full written contract. If you're working at the direction of your client, that's a great way to add value to your services as an insurance agent.
Yes. Thank you, Ellie. This is probably one of the biggest things. A little Googling and a few questions can tell you a lot about the future of a tech company. Have they had any past performance issues? Customers who demanded refunds or refused to pay for their services. These things tell you if they're making a customer happy or not. I always say one claim leads to 3, 4, and 5. It's always held true that that if they are not making their clients happy, they're going to ask for their money back, or they're going to sue them, or for non-payment. It can get very ugly. But so we are really looking for customers, and you should, who haven't really had issues. If they have, then the question begs, what steps have you taken to reduce the potential for it happening again? But I've seen many times where one E&O claim, usually there's going to be a couple more right behind it. So it's a question we certainly ask a lot. However, there are legitimate claims that do happen for E&O. So I don't want to tell you they don't happen, because they do. But in this band segment of revenue that we're looking at, they tend to happen a lot less. You'll see underwriters jump up and down when they write a very, very high profile client. They're the worst ones to write because those are the ones that have a lot of claims. And like I said, if they have that one claim, it usually leads to more. For D&O, the founders ever been sued for mismanagement. That makes people uneasy. No real property coverage, but they do have constant small business property claims, whether usually it's going to be their computers that they lose or get stolen.
Yeah, my brother-in-law had a startup in San Francisco, and his office kept getting broken into, and laptops kept getting stolen, and computer equipment kept getting stolen, and the insurance company was like losing it, being like, figure something out, move your office, do something, anything.
Yeah. So we do see some claims. They do happen, but they tend not to be as frequent. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
You guys have heard a lot from Brad, but I'm sure you have some questions. Take a minute and type your questions into the questions section. He's here to answer anything about technology risks, who to go after, what questions to ask, how to know a good risk from a bad risk. And in the interim, I'll tell you that we're really excited to start right now writing technology with all of you guys. You'll be getting a follow-up email from me. And if you're ready to start quoting and writing technology risks, we're excited to have you. We're going to give you access to our technology quoting process online. It is exactly like cyber with a couple different questions, and I'll be doing a demo of that system next month. So if you and your office are ready to do that and you want a special demo, you just let me know. You can email me at ellie@wingmanins.com. If you have any follow-up questions for Brad or anybody else, you can send them to help or brad@wingmanins.com. And we're very excited to start writing business with all of you. So who has questions? All right. Here we go. Sorry, I'm just popping them out. All right. What risks should we avoid at all costs? Brad, give some industry
I would
specifics.
say at all costs that those that have had a frequency of claims would be the first thing I would avoid at all costs.
What
Definitely.
about some industries that you think might not be worth their time to go after?
Nuclear, cannabis, um, anything that's controlling manufacturing, so like a crane, things of that nature. Think to yourself is, from my perspective, really is bodily injury and property damage. If this should fail, could it injure human beings, or property? That's what I look at, and if you say yes, there's a high potential, I would say there's a low potential that we would probably write it.
So then
Okay.
the inverse to that would be software as a service companies where you're just leasing software out to another company, or the government contract work, or the help desk companies.
Yep.
Those are all the low risk stuff because you write software that you then lease to other businesses, and it makes
Right.
it low risk.
Right. Website development, those are fine. It's just think to yourself, what's the worst thing could happen if the service or the product should fail? Okay. If you have a medical device and you putting in the software that controls an oxygen sensors or things of that nature, or controls the flow of oil, which I've seen all these things. They're
Right.
tough. How about trains? I mean, I've been involved where the signaling didn't work right because of the software. And let me tell you, they lead to 25, $30 million claims. So that's what I would avoid at all costs. Those that have had a lot of claims, because they will tell you a lot, and those that can cause bad potential for bodily injury or property damage. Yes.
Okay. Greg asks if we have an appetite manual or guide. Greg, we do have a one sheet that helps outline, but much like our cyber product, we're open to anything from a revenue basis, from a risk basis. There are a few things that we won't do that Brad sort of touched on, nuclear companies, things like that, payment processing companies. But for the most part, it's open to pretty much anything. I will send out our E&O one sheet to all of you guys as part of the final wrap up of this webinar series. And if you have any additional questions, submit the account or go on live chat and ask us in real time if it's something that we would consider before you enter the account, and we'll tell you right away. But most of the time, we're going to try to quote it if we can.
Yep.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Last call. Well, thank you, Brad. That was a
Yep.
wonderfully informative session.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you, folks, for being on the call. And like Ellie said, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me or Ellie will get to me. And we look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, guys, and reach out if you have anything, and you'll be hearing from me.
Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you.